Welcome to the 18th Verzió International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival. In this panel, we will explore co-production possibilities between European countries and the United States and the secret of a successful co-production. My name is Noémi Szakonyi. I'm an independent director and producer based in Budapest and New York City, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are joined today by Anita Rehoff Larsen. Anita is a Norwegian producer and the co-owner of the production company Santa Busand. Anita has produced many of the company's award-winning films and been shortlisted for an Academy Award. Her latest films include Sisters on Track, premiered at CPH Doc, and Tribeca 2021, and released worldwide on Netflix. And Ganda by Viktor Kossakovsky premiered in competition at Berlinale 2020. We have here with us Marc Smolowitz, a multi-award-winning independent filmmaker based in San Francisco. With 3 decades of experience, Marc has been significantly involved in 50+ successful films. His film company, 13th Gen, works with a dynamic range of independent film. In 2016, he received one of the prestigious Gotham Fellowships to attend the Cannes Film Festival's Producers Network and Marchedu Film, marking him as one of the USA's most influential independent producers. So hi there, I shortly introduced you, but can you please tell us a bit more about yourselves? I'm actually very curious about what motivated you to start doing international co-productions. Anita?
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for inviting this panel. I'm very happy to talk about it from my perspective. So I think my goal was, first of all, I have a background as a director, and was also so many of my films as a director was made in Santa Busand. And then there was an opportunity to develop the company, and we needed new producers. So I kind of took that possibility with me, international projects, and I started to think about a new way of working with documentaries, but from a producer perspective. I think what I took with me was the learning of the kind of precious work as a director has when they come to us. And also for me, it was important to also work creatively as a producer. So even though I didn't have the kind of economical and financial background, so that was a little bit of a challenge, I really felt that the projects needed to be as precious to me as it was for the director. So my way kind of came in with the kind of empathy that was with the director. And I spent then many years to develop myself as a producer. I ran to all the pitching forums in Europe to kind of learn how to work more as a producer. And I did the producer workshop Eurodoc, and started then as my first working firstly with co-productions in Europe. Then also with Gunda, so my previous films, then I also for the first time worked with an independent co-production with the USA, and also now I've been working with bigger streamers like Netflix.
Thank you so much. Marc?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak. So as you mentioned, I'm based in San Francisco, and I highlight that first and foremost because I'm not based in New York and I'm not based in Los Angeles, right? And so as a person based in San Francisco doing independent film, very early in my career, going back to the 1990s, I had figured out that I needed to look to the globe in order to really find my pathway forward. And so that was something I did by design very early in my career. I started my first film company when I was 26 years old, and that company started first in theatrical distribution and international sales. And I always had the goal of being a filmmaker. But I had very early on, I had worked at film festivals, and I had sort of seen the industry through the lens of working at film festivals. And I was traveling to Toronto and Rotterdam and different festivals. And through that experience, I got exposed to Rotterdam's The Cinemart, right? And so the Cinemart was an early co-production market exposure for me, focused, back then entirely on fiction. But it showed me as a US professional that there was really interesting collaborations happening in Europe and elsewhere that the United States was not a part of, right? That we were so focused on either being inside the Hollywood system or decidedly in the indie system. And in that decade, there was very little kind of overlap between those two systems. There was a big decade for indie film. There was lots of growth in the art house film market, as we called it back then. But it certainly wasn't the environment for documentaries that we see now, right? It was a very, very different time. But because of that exposure of doing international sales, of attempting to acquire and buy and sell movies, and it was a fairly easy transition for me to kind of back my way into being a producer of movies as well. And because I was understanding how films got financed and how they were bought and sold. And that was those were pivotal early learnings for me as a filmmaker. And it was all kind of by design. I sort of had seen that audience was critical, and that if you were going to make, art house films or specialized films, you had to know your audience so you could sort of, really unleash the sales and distribution potential of a movie. So this kind of backing into producing was how it happened. And then the very first movie I made as a producer, which was a film called Trembling Before God, wound up being an international co-production between the US, France, and Israel. And in a lot of ways, I point to that experience as being kind of a template for even how I still work, now over 20 years later. We had an independent documentary with global themes, global characters, and it was doing very well, similarly kind of moving around, there were not as many pitch forms back in that decade, but it was starting to sort of take it to different places, most notably what used to be called the independent feature film market, which now goes by Gotham. That market has changed over the years. It's now called Independent Film Week. But we had Trembling Before God there, and there was sort of an interest in the film, internationally there because of these international characters and a growing interest in LGBT issues around the world, which that film had gay themes. So the story with that one was, in France, it was kind of a private investment in the film by a distributor who was interested in getting producer credits on documentaries. So that was his motivation. And then in Israel, where we had a significant character, we actually entered into an off-treaty co-production agreement with a channel, that was sort of a huge win for the film. And that was also kind of supported through the work of a sales agent who also became a co-producer on the film. And we all know that person. That person is Philippa Kowarski, who's now at BBC, right? So these are relationships that go back many, many, many years. And that film really kind of, it sort of started me on a journey of every film can be global. Every film's sales and distribution potential can be unleashed in different ways, partnering with festivals and markets to advance the footprint of the film. And that has been sort of my sort of sweet sauce, if you will, as a filmmaker and a producer over the years, is really looking to the globe and understanding rights and how to manage rights. And we can sort of talk more about that as the conversation continues. The other thing I'll share is that early on, when we were going to Cinemart, I was with a few from the US were going to Cinemart, right? There wasn't very many of us. And there were two colleagues of mine, and I was sort of much younger than them, and they were really mentors for me at the time. We started a co-production market in San Francisco in the 90s called IFCON. It was the International Film Financing Conference. It was before ITFA Forum, before the Toronto Hot Docs Forum. It was a very early, event that was sort of modeled after Cinemart. And that event had 30 fiction projects and 30 nonfiction projects. And we scheduled it right before Sundance. So we were able to attract European people and Asian people to come through San Francisco and then route to Sundance. So that event went on for 6 years and was kind of right as I was growing my career as a distributor, as a sales agent, and a producer. So it was all these things were sort of kind of coming together at the same time. And it was like, a very accelerated learning for me to understand how the global film market works. This is all before streamers. So, Anita's talking about working with streamers, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. That's a very different model, right? It's not really a traditional co-production in the sense of how EU movies used to be put together, right? With different commissioning editors and so on and so forth. And it makes things, there's sort of benefits to that and there's challenges with that, right? So we can talk more openly about that in a few minutes. But this is a really interesting moment to kind of be revisiting, how do we want to think about US and EU cooperation in movies? Because I'll tell you, as I'm a very active member of DPA, which is the Documentary Producers Alliance here in the US, and we have a collaboration right now with DAE, the Documentary Association of Europe, right? And we have a group that is actually building a sort of a toolkit for how to do this, how to do US EU co-productions now. And I think it's going to hopefully be a very helpful toolkit to kind of, kind of a contribution to the field to help support filmmakers who are contemplating this way of working, because it is a really important way for films to get developed and financed and produced. So that's my introduction.
Thank you so much. So it seems you have both like tremendous international experiences, but I would just like take a step back and ask you like, what are the major differences in the work of a European producer and US-based or an American producer? Are there any, or like how do you usually work? Anita, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, yeah, there's huge differences, I think, maybe more than we than we know. And I think, of course, for me to start into that is first of all the kind of legal system and all the kind of legal aspects of both shooting in the US, but also distributing there. I think coming from the Nordic countries where everything is mostly about trust and and then moving into something like this where you have to make sure that everything you have in the picture has been legally cleared. When we're shooting a lot of, I think also in Nordic and in Europe in general, it's not so, it's very easy to film in the public sphere, in buildings. Normally it's not so difficult, but just filming in the US and distributing, you need to have everything cleared. And I think that for us it kind of needs a whole bigger team and a bigger system that we have been working before. In our productions, we normally have quite small team and crew. The producer normally do a lot of the line production and the project management of the films. But going both now when I have both been filming a whole film in the US and also distributing it, I had to kind of build a whole new system around my production that was very different and quite new to me. And also working with kind of thinking all the way until the end. We used to work with quite local contracts, with Nordic contracts, and thinking about so trying to think about the whole line in the end. If you want to have your film distributed in the US, you need to make sure that you have all the correct rights when coming to also the distribution. So for me, it was a very, very big learning curve. I'm very happy that I had good co-producers in the US who could help me with that. Also that I had help line producers who's been working both in the US and in Europe and could see kind of that angle from both sides. So yeah, for me, it was a lot to learn, but very, very exciting and very inspiring, but and different.
Yeah, so just to build on that, I mean, that's all extremely interesting and spot on from Anita. We do have very different sort of business practices in general that I can point to. I mean, for me, I think that fundamentally the biggest difference, you know, and let's talk about outside the streamers for a second, just because I think that's a very particular example of how those kinds of movies get made. So outside of streamers, you know, there's independent filmmakers in the US fundraise differently. Okay, it's just the culture of fundraising here is very different. We often fundraise. I use the word in sprints, right? So raise some money, shoot some. Raise some money, shoot some. Raise some money, shoot some. You know, there's a real belief in sort of, you know, picking up cameras right away and developing while you're also shooting to kind of find your story. And that also, it kind of is a proof of concept model, right? You're able to show your funders, look at what we're doing. This is what the material is like. This is how it's developing. And it's sort of, it helps you differentiate your pitch, you know, and really kind of build it out in ways that kind of get, you know, grow your opportunities for supporters. And that's kind of a big difference, I think, because, and I think it's changing in Europe and it's changing generally everywhere because we all need to believe in the importance of working fast and effectively, right? But for many decades, you know, the main sort of, you know, posture over in Europe was don't pick up a camera until your film is fully financed, until all your co-production agreements are signed, sealed, and delivered, and then you start to make your movie, right? And I have had experiences of making movies that implicate Europe and want to shoot there. And we have a lot of interest from channels and we have a lot of interest from, you know, potential funds, but they don't move fast enough for the story, right? And so we, you know, that sort of sense of like, ooh, we can't wait for this person because, you know, for this funding because this person's in their 90s. And if we don't shoot them now, you know, we're not going to have the story that we want to tell, right? So those are sort of, I mean, I think that's changing in Europe more, and there's a little more interest in the sort of shoot now, you know, fundraise now, shoot now, fundraise now approach. But I think that is a big difference just in how the two areas of the world are working, right? And I think that's an important thing to highlight because from there, other things flow in terms of just how we work and how we think about the different phases of the journey of making a movie. You know, it's really quite different. The other thing that I'll highlight in the US is that a lot of nonfiction movies that are outside or networks, they get funded and developed through what we call a fiscal sponsorship arrangement. So I have a for-profit film company, 13th Gen, and we sometimes have our nonfiction projects fiscally sponsored by nonprofits that provide that service. So you can operate like a charity, right? People can make donations. They can, you know, there's a huge culture of philanthropy here in the United States that isn't quite as common in Europe. And I've had movies, you know, that ranging, you know, from $500,000 to $1 million budget, where 30% or more of the budget has come through philanthropic donations or grants or foundation support or major donors. So the culture of philanthropy is kind of baked into how nonfiction movies get funded and produced and kind of made possible here in the US. And I think you're getting exposure to that from the EU perspective more and more by starting to see some of these funders really sort of stepping up their investment in movies. You know, some of them are foundations like Ford Foundation and, you know, names you may be starting to see more and more of, you know, at the front of documentaries. And this is not going away. This is a way that movies get, you know, especially given the diversity of projects, the kind of range of interests that people are making movies about right now here in the US, you know, there's also special interest funders, right? You know, I mentioned LGBTQ stuff, you know, that's one of the sweet spots of my company. So I have a huge, you know, I have 3 decades of relationships with funders who care about LGBTQ stories, right? So I go to them, you know, on an ongoing basis, and other areas too, public health, you know, there's lots of issue-based funding going on in the US that is very, very different. And I think that, you know, but what I can say that still remains very hard is the development phase of a movie. It's very, very challenging in the US to find development funds in general. And, you know, getting to even the point to where you have the competitive pitch that you could put in front of a streamer, you know, there's quite a bit of out-of-pocket money and time, right? And so I think that's a gap here. There seems to be more of an understanding that you have to fund development in the EU if you want good projects to kind of, you know, develop and kind of be, you know, rising to the top. It's not baked into how people think here quite yet. And then the streamer system, you know, and I think there's probably more to say about that in a few minutes, is a whole other way of making movies now. And it's so talent focused, I think, over issue focused. Yes, there are issues in the room, and those are big parts of how the films get greenlit and and supported in that space, but it's ultimately very talent focused, and it's because it's Hollywood, and that's the system, how the system works. And there's, I think that the win there is that there's more talent being contemplated that's diverse and involved in making movies, more women, more queer people, more people of color, more everyone. But it's still talent based, and that's a different model entirely. And I think and those companies, they want to finance the whole film. They want to own all worldwide rights. They're building their global domination. That's how they roll. And I think 5 years ago, there was a real sense in Europe, like, what are they doing? What are the streamers doing? And I mean, I remember being at the forum a few years ago, not that long ago, maybe 2017, with the streamers kind of hanging out in the back of the room, and all the commissioning editors saying, we need you to identify yourself. Like there's this sort of secret cohort of people who were financing movies from the streamers. We're not jumping into this sort of traditional co-production sort of model. And at the end of the day, guess what? They won. Like they really did win. So it's they're now in Europe, they're now in Asia, they're now in Latin America, and they're not going anywhere. So it's been interesting to watch the EU funders and channels and other types of platforms kind of lean into that reality, because it's the reality. And so I think, we'll see how that, what the next few years really mean for that, for us, for how our films get financed and produced and released, because it can be quite remarkable to get your money all from one source.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate a little bit about what Marc says, because I totally agree with him, that they have, I think for us, the development phase is much easier than the bigger money in the end. So since we also have the public funding in the Nordic countries and a lot of Europe too, the kind of development funding is easier, but then it's difficult to get to the bigger production money. And also, if you don't sell out all the territories, if you have a very artistic film, as we had with Gunda, which was okay, we had a very well-known director, Victor Kosakowski, and who has done many films, and you can think that it will be easier, but it was quite challenging. We managed to have development funding for a longer time, but then it comes to a stage that you actually have to show that you have a lot of distribution, and then you can finance the production. And that's a little bit problematic too, because the TV channels are still just paying very little money, and the bigger money is kind of more in the public funding or in the co-productions. And then for us, it was life-saving with the philanthropy and the grants in the US, because like you say, Marc, that they are much into different themes. So our film was about animal welfare, and this is very much bigger in the States, that there are a lot of grants within these kind of themes. And I think that for us, that was what managed to get us through the film, actually, because we managed to find those financiers who were actually very interested in the film and the theme. So I think kind of the balance between the kind of development funding that we have here, that you don't have so much, and the kind of more theme-based or philanthropy that you have in the state was very helpful, at least for a film like Gunda, which was difficult to sell before it was finished.
Really good point. Yeah, I think that, so often as producers, we struggle to get our films finished. That's just the reality sometimes. And we know we're delivering something really beautiful and exciting. And then, then festival placements drive the interest. And and then you're in this very crowded, landscape of movies where you're trying to differentiate yourself at festivals. I think part of what makes an EU-US co-production make sense is really the strengths of the producers that are coming together to kind of complement one another, right? When someone comes to me with an international project and they think that I can bring something, I really look at, well, what's going on in the producers unit and what can I bring that will add value to the team? And typically the things that I bring value around are what we've talked about, which are sort of issue-based fundraising in the US, in communities, and philanthropy. I can do that extremely well. But also my company we are actively handling the worldwide festivals of some 4 or more films per year. So, over the arc of my career, I've screened movies at more than 250 festivals on 5 continents, including the Sundances and the Berlins and the Venices, but also all of the kind of B and C, what I lovingly refer to as the B and C festivals, that aren't the top tier festivals, but are huge partners in how we have monetized worldwide festivals here at my company. So I typically require that an international film that I'm getting involved in here allow 13th Gen to be the exclusive handler of festivals worldwide, and that we are in charge of that journey. So, and that's one thing that we bring, and we do a very good job. I wouldn't pretend to be able to do it for 20 films a year, but we can do it really well for about 4 or 5, sometimes 6. This year we have 4 films doing extremely well in festivals around, and it's a mixture of 2 feature docs, 1 scripted feature, and 1 short narrative scripted. So it's, we're able to kind of, create a slate here, and that's a really sweet thing that I feel like my boutique company brings to the table that you're not going to find everywhere in the US. It just, so I think it's a lot about, what people bring to the table, how we can all help each other and create a team that is very intentional. And a lot of times for me, like I'm always, if you come to me with a finished film and you tell me, look at my film and, tell me what you think I can do with US festivals, that's actually very late. I can't really help a filmmaker recover, in a US strategy, if they show me a finished movie. So for those who are watching, this event, contact us early, even if it's just to seed the relationship. There may not be a clear fit for a co-production, but you just never know how this constellation of relationships worldwide will open you up to opportunities. I've created important touch points in Asia, in Australia, New Zealand, in up and down the African continent, all across Western and Eastern Europe, and then some. And of course, that's taken years, and it takes real work to maintain those relationships. But if it were not for those relationships, I would not be sitting here, as a reasonably successful producer talking to you today. It's all about relationships. And sometimes you get to work with these people multiple times. Like, the joy of these relationships is that these don't have to be one-offs. We can keep making movies together, and we can keep growing our enterprise together. And as the market changes, we don't have to be so reactive all the time. I'm all about these career-long alliances that really shore up our effort to keep doing independent work and supporting, first and second time teams to bring new talent to the landscape. It's I think we all have an interest in just telling great stories, and we know our audiences are kind of global more and more. But yeah, it's funny. The festival world in the US is quite interesting, because of course everyone wants to go to Sundance, wants to go to Tribeca, wants to go to South by Southwest, right? But there's a huge festival marketplace over here that could actually breathe life into a film that, just because you don't get into Sundance and you have a really strong film from outside the United States doesn't mean all bets are off in the US, right? But those festivals, the B and C festivals, or the less prestigious ones, they don't drive sales as much, right? So you have to really aim high in the US in order to get any real interest from buyers. You just have to.
I think also just to add in about the kind of when to approach a co-producer, I think that is really we want to, in one way, it could be also difficult if you feel that you are very early with the project. But for me, it's also, we also need time to learn about the film, to develop with it. And, everyone, they want to be part of it, I think also with distributors and festivals and everyone, that's really what they want. They want to follow the film from it was an early project and to see how it develops and being part of that journey. So for us, it's not just a job and we think, okay, we can finance this here and we take a small fee to do the job, or it's not about that. You need to really feel that this is something you want to do. This is a story you want to help get out, and you want to help the financing, the distribution, and the life of the film. And that really, for me, starts quite early. I want to be there from the first steps, and I think for the films that we are part of early, we also are able to do much more with the film, because it's really is how how much you feel about the film also through the whole process. And for me also, sometimes, of course, I take in films when they come late in the stage, just because, you know, yeah, maybe they didn't come earlier, or there has been other things than I do, but it takes time to develop, you know, that strong relation with the film and with the team. So to start that process early, I think is crucial to be able to do a good job.
Yeah, I guess so. Successful co-production needs a lot of strategy. And I was wondering, can you categorize co-productions? Like, we can talk about the streaming here or the traditional co-productions, or every movie requires a different angle? Or do you have like types, and can you put in a box a film or not?
I can say a little bit about that first, because I had kind of two films that I had, three films that was kind of the three films that I wanted to do, like the bigger films, and to map out the strategy for each one of them. And I think that's really, really important. In the first stage, I kind of went into the same little direction, you know, okay, we have to develop it into a stage where we can present it. Then I started to introduce it to the market. But one of the films were clearly a film I wanted for theatrical release. The other film, I wanted the more kind of normal way financing with broadcasters. But at a certain point, I saw that, okay, one of the films I have to be very careful with. I want to have the possibility to hold into the film all the time, because whenever you go out, there's also a lot of input from everyone. They want to change your film, you know. Okay, but what about something that, can you change this? Or what about this? Are you sure you're not going to have a dialogue? Are you sure you don't going to have a narrator? You know, they have so many ideas, you know, outside that also that you get confused, you know, okay, what should I do? So in one place, we took the films back and said, we will keep the control for this film ourselves. And then we had the other film that we felt this film needs to go out really, really big. And then you kind of make different strategy. Okay, one strategy is to go the normal way that we normally would do, with financing, with many channels, with Creative Europe, like we normally do, and working closely with the TV channels and co-producing maybe with Arte in France or Germany, and or then the possibilities to sell out world rights to a streamer if that's possible. But these strategies need to be taken quite early, because if you start to sell out the territories, you can sometimes not change it again. So even though you also want to have time to elaborate on what kind of route you are taking, you also need to be quite sure about that on an early stage, because when you have taken the decision, there's no turning back.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we're more and more forced to make those decisions very early, and not sort of, you know, give ourselves the time to see what trajectory a film might find itself in a more organic sense. Which is sort of both a challenge and an opportunity to kind of force the conversation early. You know, I think that a lot of movies that I've been involved with, you know, as I look back on my career, each one has its own story, how it was financed. And, you know, even the ones that were hard to finance, when I look back on them 3 years later after they've premiered and they've had a long festival life and they've had nice footprint in sales and distribution around the world, it always makes sense. Like when you look back on a movie, it always makes sense. Sometimes when you're making the movie, you can pull your hair out. But when you look back on the movie, it typically makes sense. You know, for US filmmakers, I think, you know, where we are most relevant in co-productions in a more traditional sense of how we think about co-productions is when we have a movie that has either a central character or a sort of story, a central character who is globally famous, like globally relevant, like that's a huge win for a movie, or an issue that has global implications. Like those are the two things that I think and if we originate those movies here, and they need to be shot around the world, then we can be motivated to think creatively about co-production and outside of streamers. Okay, so let's put the stream like separate from the streamers for a second, right? And the way that that can happen is, you know, depending on how quickly or not the film needs to move at pace to get the story. You know, first and foremost is to get a good nonfiction sales agent. That's critically important. You know, they can partner with you. They can really be, you know, on the team, so to speak, almost like co-producers. I really feel like the best sales agents, they don't see them. They don't want to call themselves producers because they don't want to be implicated as such, but they almost operate almost in a mindset as producers, because they're, especially if they see the global potential of a movie and they can jump on early enough. And then then you're not alone when you're going to markets and pitch forums, right? You have a partner in that journey. You're you know, you're able to maybe not have to beat everyone, and you can divide and conquer, you know. And the best scenario is when that sales agent is really shoring up all rights deals in key territories, right? And because the all rights distributors will pay, you know, something of meaning and value to your budget in order to kind of, you know, continue to finance the film. I don't think you'll finance the entire budget of a film, but you would finance a nice chunk of it, you know, to kind of, you know, move the movie forward. Here in the US, once we have those kinds of like confirmations piling up, you know, that starts to look attractive at home, right? And we can start to sort of talk to different people who back movies here. Like, you know, people love to get on jump on something that already has some traction, right? So if you can say, look, we sold this movie to 6 or 10 territories, you know, and but the US is still available. And the US might be the most important market because it's a US team and this character's famous in the US. You know, so that's a way of kind of embracing the world before you shore up your US approach sometimes. But I think it's, you know, that has worked for me. And I think that, like, you know, case in point right now, though, I have 2 films at my company where I'm sort of stepping in as the kind of US co-producer on very international projects. And, you know, here again, these are films I feel I can help fundraise for in the US more because it's that issue-based model. This is what I know I can do for these 2 movies. And this is why I've said yes to participate, because I have that specialization and those relationships that no one else probably in their network would be able to bring to the movie. But a lot of what they're doing elsewhere is financing through channels, so you know, it's not, you're not going to get like a partial bit of money from an outlet over here. Like, that's just not, it doesn't work that way here. It's, you know, no, it's harder and harder to even get people to think about US rights only. Not impossible, but it's, you know, if you're talking with people at the pitch stage, like, they're already thinking about the world, right? If you're as opposed to just the US rights. So if I sell off anything outside the US, like Anita said, I know I'm not making a movie with a streamer, like in a traditional sense, because that ship has sailed, right? We've sold off 6 territories, and we can't change course. You know, it's you know, and you know, there have been stories, not for me personally, but for colleagues, where a film was bought by a streamer anyway out of festivals that was co-produced through different countries. And, you know, and I know behind the scenes, like, those channels don't like that. You know, they want to show the movie that they've helped make happen, right? So we have to think about, you know, okay, if we're on a trajectory with a certain path of getting a movie financed, like, that's the journey, and that's the one we're on. Holding out for streamer financing, you know, the question becomes, well, how long do you hold out, right? And I think what's happening more and more in the US is that there are, you know, I don't like this word so much, but it makes my point. You know, there are gatekeeper companies, right? So the streamers have a roster of companies that they like to do business with. And like I said, many of them it's talent based. Many of them have agents and managers in Hollywood, and that's the system, right? And so you can go to those companies to sort of help you broker, you know, things in ways that might service the project. So but it's also, even that's evolving, right? So I think everyone sees their limitations in that. So it's certainly dynamic, right? I mean, you know, you're having a conversation with us in November, right, 2021. Talk to me in a year, it could look very different, right? Because we know that one thing we know about our industry is that it's always changing, and the global marketplace is increasingly relevant, and that will continue to change in a fast-paced way how we make movies.
But I think basically also that, to, like Marc said, also to see each movie as their own individual, and it needs their own path. And I think also, like you said, it's so much competition also, and what is the best for the film? Where should this film go? Maybe it's and taking into account that the streamers also may want something different from what you want, or what is the film and what is really the goal, and talk through that. And I think to do that very clearly with the director and have the open communication with the whole team, it's very important, and understanding the whole process, and using time to evaluate it, and finding out your different routes, because then you are sure that you took the right decision when you came to that. And that's really important. When you took a decision, you have to stand by it. And like Marc said, you look back in the films and you think, yeah, it's right, it was correct at that time, but maybe could also be correct if you went in another direction too. So there are also many possibilities, but making sure that you have kind of made A, B, and C plan, and you have kind of the possibilities, and took the decisions. When I'm looking back in these two projects, I can also see that I made those lists. I made like, okay, this is one suggestion. What is the kind of positive and the negative directions if we go this way? And I would do that for all three kind of directions, and then I can also go back and say, yeah, that was why I did that way and that way. So to just make sure that the whole team is agreeing on why you're doing like you do, then you don't have any and being open and transparent about it the whole way. I think it's important.
Yeah, and for me, absolutely. And for me, I think, some of this attempting international co-production between the EU and the US is really about trust and good faith in that there will be some, results, through that process. And I will sort of, confess that there have been two movies in recent memory where I tried and I couldn't raise the money in the US. And at a certain point, you have to kind of throw up your hands and say, you know what, maybe this isn't a movie that we can, raise money for in the US, at least not at this stage. And that is okay, and so you have to give your movie back, so to speak. Because there's, especially on issue-based fundraising, like it's such a crowded landscape. And it's, like, am I going to sort of step up and recommend we do another Kickstarter for a movie that may or may not have relationships in the US? I think there's a lot of different things that you can try when you see, like when movies are grown through my company from very early, I'm creating those relationships, from the ground up for the life of the film, right? When I jump on something that from an outside party that might be outside the United States, like, mid-production or during post, it's because I see an opportunity and I think I can add value and find some money or add some, special pieces of the, of the puzzle that will help the film move forward. And I think if you try for 18 months and it doesn't work, you have to own that, right? And as someone who's raised like $30 million for movies over the arc of my career, it's not, that's really hard work, right? You really have worked very, 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 very hard to raise money. Fundraising is like the hardest part of the job. And it's increasingly competitive, and there's so many films and filmmakers, and I welcome, everyone into this beautiful community that we are a part of. It's global and it's, it's really dynamic. And there's all kinds of new ways to get movies financed, but sometimes it's not a perfect fit, and you have to own that and move on, right? And understand that the film will probably find its right path forward regardless. In the case of one of these movies, it went on to do extremely well, and I was so happy for them. So it's and so understanding, okay, this maybe come back at a later date, or this wasn't the right fit, is also a painful but important a little self-awareness in this journey. Sometimes it's important.
So what kind of advice would you give to upcoming producers who want to do a successful US-EU co-production? What are the pitfalls? What are the highlights? And what should they be careful about?
Maybe I can start because I think that, there's so much curiosity about the US from, European filmmakers and producers. I think the main thing is, first of all, don't see the US and Canada in the same way. That's an important thing to highlight because it's a very different set of relationships and how things work. Because sometimes North America can be packaged as such, but it's not always, it doesn't always work. So that's important. The other thing I would say is that if you're making a movie in English, that is going to be a win for English speaking territories, right? So that's an important piece of the puzzle here. Like I have found a lot of traction in English language territories, right? Like that's just a network of countries where sometimes my movies find some traction, and that's so if you're making a movie in English, that's another thing to highlight. And I think finally to say, try to, look, there's been a pandemic and that's changed how much in-person stuff we do versus virtual. Here we are on Zoom, which is sort of a value proposition to be in touch with each other this way, but it's certainly different from going to IDFA in person or going to CPH Docs in person or going to Doc Leipzig in person, right? So just as you all go to your own festivals in the EU, when it's safe to travel, be bold. Come on over to our side of the pond and attend one of our events to sort of see, how we do business over here. I know it can be, seem wildly expensive. Trust me, I'm on the West Coast of the United States. So when I make the decision to go to Berlinale, to go to Cannes, to go to IDFA, to go anywhere, I know I'm making an investment in my company and an investment in my projects, right? So and that's where business happens. And so I think just as you would make the decision to go to Thessaloniki, you must need to make the decision to go to maybe Independent Film Week. I think that Independent Film Week in New York is probably the greatest place that a non-American could come to get like a lot of exposure to how the US works all in 1 week. And that market's in September. And it's, likely to be in person in 2022. Certainly Hot Docs, which is in Toronto, which is different than the US, but is a great place to go in person. And that for Europeans will feel a lot like IDFA. It will feel a lot like CPH Docs because a lot of the same players go to Toronto for that. But I think we have to all take the bold leap to travel to each other's countries if we want to do business with each other. I think that's that's the piece of the puzzle that I think I've confirmed for myself with this pandemic is that this kind of interaction is not enough. It's just not. We need to be in person together to make business happen. And in some ways, that was nice to be reminded of. How much I missed traveling to festivals and markets, as much as it is a lift to go and make it work financially at times, and for it to make sense, every year. My own circuit is always defined by two things. Where can I go to get financing, and where can I go to, unleash the sales potential of a movie, right? And so every year I'm making tough decisions around those two goals for my projects and my movies. And so, you could be on the road all the time, right? Think of the circuit. There's scarcely a week or a month where there isn't something of value happening in Europe or the United States or elsewhere. So we have to pick and choose the events that make the most sense for the particular trajectory of a film company or a film or a particular artist.
I think also to add something there, I think also to also start to work, think about who can you bring in creatively on your projects from the US. If you are looking to work with North America, is there someone there you can collaborate? I think it's same as it works with our countries. Okay, if you want to co-produce in Europe, you have to share some creative parts, to get Film Institute money. You have to include, if I'm going to work with Germany, or I have to shoot there, or have to use creative input. And I think the same, even though it doesn't work the same with kind of US co-producing, I think also that makes sense. Bring on someone there that could add that creative value to your project too, because then it will also be more natural fit and a norm and a more kind of connected co-production, because that's really what you're looking for all the time. You know, you're looking for sharing creative input, and also that why is this European production? Why do they want to co-produce with the US? Oh, maybe it is something very kind of connected. Maybe you are shooting there, but also like everyone else, then bring in someone local that can help the project. I'm saying that in Norway because we had a lot that the Norwegian Film Institute really want us to work with the North American and have more distribution there. So now a lot of the Norwegian productions, they want to make films in the US, but they're bringing their own team and they're going there. And that's what I'm trying to say, you know, that, okay, that's fine, but bring someone local on as well, you know. Who are we to just go there, bringing our own teams and making films there and think that it's an American production in a way? It's not, because the culture is still different. And, you know, I think also US distributors also want films from the US to be, to have creative input from American filmmakers. So I think, you know, we have to have respect for each other cultures and bringing on creative input that could also help the distribution.
Beautifully said. I think that's so important, Anita, what you added there. I think, you know, we, you know, here at my company, you know, I love hiring locally. It's such a win for a project. And, you know, we didn't talk a lot about that part of like the physical execution of production and how that works at, you know, in different countries. I mean, that's a huge piece of the puzzle, right? You know, I mean, I think, you know, if I could sort of maybe end my remarks today like with this, is that the way we think about co-production, the sort of larger tent of the idea of co-production has changed, you know, in part because of the streamers, in part because of the global economy. But it kind of commands us to think creatively about, well, who are we involving in our films, in which countries and why, right? If it's about talent and relationships, like that should be above the line and below the line, right? And really thinking creatively about how to create teams that are global and that really, you know, breathe life into these stories that we want so much to make sense around the world. And, you know, so I think, you know, the US, which was always so co-production averse for many years, and then EU, which had very rigid ways of doing co-production, we're all blending more now, and we're all seeing each other's working styles, cultural and national differences that feed the creativity and the ways that movies get produced and financed and released. You know, I think it's an incredibly vibrant time to be thinking about co-production, and you know, that in a new way, in a bold way, that creates more opportunities for more films and filmmakers. That's really what co-production is about creating opportunity.
Anita, Marc, thank you so much for your wonderful thoughts and the knowledge you shared. Do you feel you would like to add anything or discuss anything else?
No, I just want to add in with Marc that, you know, what we are striving to do all the time is having our film, you know, distributed and be seen by a lot of people, you know, that we are making the films for the audience. But I think along the way, since also for my production, we are kind of using between 3 and 5 years for every production, it needs also to be, you know, fun, and we want to that the process should be nice too. And what we want, and we want to work with other creative and have that input. And I think that's really the lovely about co-producing, about, you know, meeting people around the globe and working within the field, that you get so much input that you can use for new projects and new films, or you can help someone else, you know, that that says, oh, do you have some contacts here? Yeah, you have. Oh, I've been working with someone from this country or here. And so there's always, you know, and I think within the documentary society, you know, there's so much sharing and helping out. And I think that's, we're like a one big family, and that's something we should continue.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
Yes, beautiful remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for you both to attending and sharing your knowledge. I think the conclusion was great. So I hope to see you sometime in Budapest too, and continue our conversation, maybe within a Hungarian, Norwegian, US co-production.
Lovely.
Bravo. Lovely. Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.